Welcome to this episode of Bible Talk. How am I supposed to start this, guys? I'm all discombobulated because I have this camera in front of me.
Welcome to episode
141 of Bible Talk, which is a podcast brought to you by 9 Marks and Southern Seminary. My name is Alex Duke, and with me are my three friends:
Sam Amati,
Jim Hamilton,
and Jamie. This is not the Jamie who works on the Joe Rogan podcast. His hourly rate was a little too high, but this is our friend Jamie, who's helping us look and sound better than we ought to. And we're here surrounded by some books, many of which Jim has written.
Oh, come on now.
Sam has a few.
There's one.
Sam wrote one somewhere. We have the Louisville Cardinal piggy bank, which is my children's piggy bank, which we emptied out for this. And there's a few other things back there. I told the guys to bring fun stuff, and that's the best they could do. So Sam, what are you going to bring?
I got to think about it.
Yeah,
Alex.
you got to think about it. So we are in happy partnership with Southern Seminary, and that's why we're here on video for the first time. So we hope it's helpful for you. And if you would like to support more work like this, friends, you should visit 9marks.org/talk. And if you want more info about Southern Seminary, you should go to sbts.edu. Jim, anything you want to say about Southern?
I'm thrilled to be here.
How long have you been on faculty?
I joined the faculty in the fall of 2008.
Okay. And Sam, you have 2 degrees from Southern.
I do. And I became a student here in January 2009. So
Hallelujah.
6 months after you came.
Yeah.
Praise
And I
the Lord.
have like 0.95 of a degree. No, and they rounded up to give me a full MDiv.
You completed the requirements for the degree.
Just barely, but I did. Okay, so today we have one job. We're going to continue doing, despite the different format, we're going to continue doing what we've been doing for 140 episodes, which is to talk through God's word. And we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 14. But before we do that, before we get on that journey, because we've pivoted to video, maybe we're going to get some first-time viewers who check this out because Southern does a better job of getting this out than 9 Marks ever did, which is okay. That's why we partnered. So why don't we help those potential first-time folks? Like, what are we doing here? What is Bible Talk? Who's it for? Is it helpful? If so, why? If not, why are we here? I think it's helpful. So what do we think? Give the folks some help.
Well, one of my favorite phrases to describe Bible Talk is something I heard Jim say a couple of years ago, and that is we are having expository conversations. So we are trying to exposit what's in the text. We're just trying to look at the words on the page and make sense of them in context, not just in the immediate context of the book, but we're also trying to make sense of the entire story of the Bible. How do all of these smaller stories fit within the grander story? How do they ultimately point us to the gospel and to the work of Jesus and his cross and resurrection? And so that's the ultimate ambition of Bible Talk, is to read all of Scripture in light of its ultimate fulfillment in Christ.
Yeah, and I would just chime in with a couple of other phrases that are common to what we do. So we are often thinking in biblical theological terms, which I would define biblical theology as the attempt to understand and embrace the interpretive perspective of the biblical authors. So we're trying to get inside their worldview. And we're often, in addition to trying to think the way the biblical authors thought, we're also often attending to typology. So we're seeing patterns that recur in the narrative. And as these patterns recur, there's this sense of escalating significance or increasing importance as each one of these installments in a pattern of events takes place. And then another thing that we often do is we try to pay close attention to literary structure of texts. And if you compare the kinds of comments that we will make in these episodes with things that you might find in a study Bible or standard commentaries, often they're not thinking about this book as a literary unity that has been composed by a single author who is making strategic choices about how he has arranged his material.
So it might be full of true data and reflections, theological reflections or exegetical insights, but they're but less often are pulling the camera back, as it were, to see the whole of the book.
Yes.
Jim, someone told me yesterday about you. You know what they said?
Nope.
They said, Jim changed his mind on biblical theology. They said that you disagree with the first book you wrote many years ago, What is Biblical Theology?
No. I don't know why anyone would tell you this. This is no.
Maybe they're a liar.
What is?
I've known Jim for 15 years, and I've Never seen him change his mind on anything.
Call Jill. Get her on the phone.
I have
Get her on the
disagree
phone.
with himself.
I have changed my mind
Jill,
on
has
things.
Jim ever changed his mind?
Definitely, no question.
Okay,
but
maybe
no.
that person's
What is
just-
what is biblical theology? I advocate the idea that it is the attempt to understand and embrace the interpretive perspective of the biblical authors. Yeah.
What's your favorite book that you've written?
Well, right now, because I've just worked back through it, edited it, it's the one that's coming out this summer called "In the Beginning Was the Word."
The one on John.
Finding meaning in the literary structure of the Gospel of John. But in terms of long term, it's either God's glory and salvation through judgment or typology. But how could I not say the Psalms? I mean, it's hard to. I love the Bible.
What's the best book your favorite book that you've written?
Probably What Should I Do Now That I'm a Christian?
Honestly,
That little pamphlet.
Really, more so than From Prisoner to Prince.
I'm proud of that book, but What Should I Do Now That I'm a Christian has it's gotten a lot of use.
Yeah, I
Pastors
recommend
have found
that
it
book
very
at
useful.
least a couple times a month.
What about you, Alex?
Well, I've my book on Egypt or on Egypt. It's so good. I forgot what it was about. On Genesis, which comes out bookstores near you next month. Yeah. So now, Jim, one more question on what you're saying. Often when people talk about biblical theology, they will like, this is what before we did this, probably if you had said, Alex, what's biblical theology? And I would have said, well, it's taking a theme and looking across all of Scripture. For example, the temple, God's presence among God's people. So you start in Genesis, and you go to the tabernacle, and then you go to the temple, and then then Jesus, and then the new heavens and the new earth.
Yeah.
That's what I would have understood biblical theology to be, which that discipline, by its at least by description of it, you kind of can't take the interpretive perspective of the human author because you've got multiple human authors, and it's so what is what you're saying in addition to that? Is there a different word for that?
Well,
do you understand what I'm
yes,
asking?
Totally. And I would say that I think the key thing is the method by which you do what you just described.
Okay.
And I would argue that the best method to pursue that is one that says, okay, what does Moses say about the cosmic temple and the tabernacle and the anticipated place where the Lord will set his name in the Pentateuch? And then how does the author of Joshua interpret Moses? And then how do the authors of Samuel interpret Joshua and Moses? So I think that the divine author has inspired the human authors to communicate his intent. And so I think we should validate our interpretations by demonstrating what the human author intended to communicate. And so to my thinking, the way that you trace a theme is you demonstrate that these human beings meant to communicate these things.
Yeah, an additional comment on that. One thing that's important to remember when we're talking about typology or biblical theology is often people hear that as some sort of reading strategy that we're imposing on the text. And instead, what we're trying to demonstrate, I think throughout this podcast, is that these types of biblical theological themes and the way that they're developed, or these types that we see in Scripture, this is not a reading strategy that we're imposing on the text as if we're just trying to take the Christ lens and lay it over the Old Testament and see something that's not there. Biblical theology, these connected themes, types, these are all products of exegesis. Actually, when you get into the text and you pay attention to things like literary structure, you pay attention to things like echoes and allusions, quotations of earlier scriptures, you're really trying to, as Jim says, embrace the interpretive perspective of this author. That's how you discover that these things are not things that we impose on the text as just this almost like reader response way of getting to Jesus. No, these things are the product of understanding the biblical authors on their own terms, according to their own context, and in a way that honors what they've written.
Okay, you didn't answer one question I asked, which is who is this for? So like, I could imagine someone's brain kind of fuzzing out or clicking out and be like, okay, these guys, this must be for pastors or seminary students, or, I'm a plumber, or a diesel mechanic, or I sell cell phones, like, is this for me or not?
When we originally talked about the podcast, the three of us,
really, it was the two of us at first.
We brought the two of us. That's true. Yep. We said that we wanted this to be accessible to the freshman college student who had recently been converted, who had never read his Bible, giving them kind of a guided tour through Scripture so that they could read the Bible with profit for themselves. And I think we've we've always endeavored to make that our target audience. Not that we just only want it listened to by freshman college students, but so as to say, we want this to be for everybody. This is not just for pastors, not just for seminary students. We're just trying to help ordinary Christians read the Bible with profit.
Yeah. Jim, anything you'd add?
As you know, I'm a baseball fan, and I love to follow the Arkansas Razorbacks. Go Hogs.
That's right. Look at that. Go Cards back there. I'm going to bring that next episode. The Cards getting more prominent place. He's too far behind.
As I listen to these guys that either narrate the games on the radio or on television.
Who's your favorite?
I like Bubba Carpenter. He's the color guy for the Hogs radio broadcast. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. I was thinking like Joe Buck or.
Oh no, MLB plays too many games. I just follow the Razorbacks.
That's fair.
Anyway, these guys will often be speaking in very technical terms about, say, the bat path through the zone or the exit velocity off the bat. But you don't have to listen very long before you pick up what they're talking about, and you come to understand what they mean. Like yesterday, the announcers were saying short to it and long through it. And they're talking about the path of the barrel of the bat from, the batter's ear or whatever to the ball and then long through the ball. And it's easy to understand. So hopefully we're speaking in ways that are maybe technical, but that ordinary people can easily pick up on just as they listen to experts comment on baseball or politics or whatever else.
Yeah. Yeah, short to it, long through it. That's kind of like us.
That's a good phrase.
Episodes.
Yeah.
Speaking of,
except today.
Yeah,
long to it today.
Yeah, long to it and long through it. Hopefully that was helpful. Thank you. And if this is your first time listening, we're glad to have you. There are 140 more of these that you can go back and listen to. 2 Kings 14.
Yep.
I'm going to read the first verse because it's not the most like exciting verse. In fact, it can be a bit disorienting because there's just a lot of names. So I'm going to read the first verse of 2 Kings 14, and then I'm going to ask you guys to just help us get our bearings. Where are we at? Who's who? What's going on? Okay, 2 Kings chapter 14, and I am reading from the ESV. In the second year of Joash, the son of Jehoaz, king of Israel, Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, began to reign. Okay, there's a lot of names, a few places, even a repeated name. Mm-hmm. So we can already we could already be like on our back feet, like what's going on? Why are there two Joashes? So let's get our bearings for a moment. Where are we? What's going on?
So if you remember, after the death of Solomon, we go through these narratives where we're bouncing back and forth between the southern kingdom of Judah and her kings and the northern kingdom of Israel and her kings. And then we get to the stories of Elijah and Elisha. And then after that interlude that focuses mainly on the prophets, it's not an interlude, it's the center of the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. We return to this pattern where we bounce back and forth between the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. So in 2 Kings chapter 12, we were looking at the southern kingdom, and specifically Joash, who was a relatively good king, even though he didn't remove the high places, but he was involved in repairing the temple, and he did, the text says, follow the Lord. And then in chapter 13, we are again in the northern kingdom with Joash, the king of the northern kingdom, and we have the account of Elisha's death. And if you remember, Elisha dies, and when they're burying somebody and they throw his body on Elisha's bones, that person raises from the dead. And I think symbolic of the hope that if Israel is going to be resurrected from the dead as a nation, then they need to be given life by the word of the prophet. Right? It's only through the prophetic word and believing that prophetic word and following it that they're going to be able to come out of spiritual death to spiritual life. Now we're moving again to the southern kingdom. So this time, to Judah. So Amaziah, the son of Joash. So as you pointed out, Alex, you have here at the beginning of 14, in the second year of Joash, king of Israel.
Which is the same as Jehoash.
Jehoash, that's right.
Amaziah, from the previous chapter.
The son of Joash,
who is a different man.
That's right. That's a different Joash, who's the king of Judah, of which this Amaziah is a son of. But as we've talked about before, the overlap of these names and the confusion is intentional. what it's demonstrating,
historically accurate and
it's historically
a bit
accurate,
evocative.
But what it's demonstrating is that Judah is going the way of Israel, right? Israel has wicked kings, and generally they as a nation are not following the Lord, and Judah is never far behind. And Judah should learn from this, that they don't want to go the way of Israel. And in fact, the Assyrians later on in the book, they're going to come in and they're going to destroy the northern kingdom. And Judah should get the picture. We should stop following in their way. We should stop having kings
Sam
like
likes
the
to spoil what's coming ahead,
like the kings of Israel. So the confusion here, or the overlap of the names, has a theological point to it to show us that the southern kingdom isn't far behind the northern kingdom.
And that's important to note, because the reason you're making the distinction between Judah and Israel is the promises made to David are promises
they're being continued on in the line of David
in Judah. And so though Israel is bigger, right? It's 11 of the 12 basically,
tribes,
and more powerful. The promises, it's not that they have nothing to do with Israel, but they're going to be fulfilled through Judah, which is a kind of a through line that becomes important even in our chapter today, because Judah and Israel are at loggerheads in today's episode. Jim, anything you want to say before we get going? I'm happy to read the first 7 verses, which are kind of give us a summary of this fellow Amaziah's reign in Judah.
Well, I think it's always worth just observing that, we've got a formula here in 14:1 in the second year of, and then names, and then who that person is the son of and how old he is. And we've had that formula, in 13:1, 13:10. Now we got it in 14:1 and 2, and we're going to get it again in 14:23. So the author is kind of signaling, okay, here's a new unit, and I'm giving you sort of
12:1 as well.
Yeah, it occurs all through here as we alternate between these kings.
Okay, so Jim, why don't you take the lead on 1 to 7, and again, this is another formula of the book where it kind of gives a summary of his reign and then focuses in on a distinct moment.
Okay, I'll just start again in verse 1.
That's fine.
In the second year of Joash, the son of Joahaz, king of Israel, Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Jehoaddin of Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, yet not like David his father.
Just to comment here, Jim, in 12:2, when we're looking at Joash, Amaziah's father, the same thing is said of him, and Jehoash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all his days, because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. So we're gonna see some overlaps between Amaziah and Joash, both at the beginning of his life and at the end of his life.
Yeah, and in keeping with what you just said, verse 3 continues, he did in all things as Joash, his father, had done, which, when we looked at Joash, we saw that there's a lot of good stuff, but there's some bad stuff too.
Pretty good. I think we called it a pretty good reign.
Yeah. And that fits with the author saying here, he did what was right, but not like David. Okay, so verse 4, but the high places were not removed. The people still sacrificed and made offerings on the high places. And again, the author doesn't come right out and say, this is, of course, out of step with Deuteronomy 12, where the Lord stipulates that Israel is to seek the place that he will set his name and they're to go there to sacrifice. But that's what the author is assuming, which, as we're going to see in just a moment, we're going to have a reference to the law of Moses. And I think the easiest way to explain this narrative is that the law of Moses is what it claims to be. It is the law of God that came from the hand of Moses in the time of Moses, and it's now informing and directing these people, and they're responding to it.
And it does help us understand the little spat we got in a few weeks ago about Josiah when they found the law.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not like they haven't
lost it altogether. It's
not like they never heard of it.
That's right.
And never knew what any of it said. We'll get to that in a few weeks, but there's an escalation in terms of their obedience to it. And maybe they found more than maybe they did lose parts of it. I don't know. But
well, this is important for understanding what Jim often talks about, embracing the interpretive perspective of the biblical authors. Oftentimes in these narratives, the narrator doesn't come out and just say, this was good, this was bad. How is it that you make those evaluations and judgments? Well, you have to inhabit their worldview. Well, what was the worldview of the author? What moral framework was he writing out of? Well, it wasn't some ancient Near Eastern custom over here or over there that we have to reconstruct through, historical inquiry. It was the book of Deuteronomy. Yeah. It was the Torah. And so as we understand Genesis through Deuteronomy, we have the framework to be able to make the evaluations to understand good, bad,
Well,
right,
and
wrong.
not only Deuteronomy, we also have David.
That's right.
To
we have the
to
patterns
compare
of the Old
and
Testament
contrast,
narratives. That's right.
which is why they even make that comparison.
That's right.
He's not like David.
That's right.
Which again is not saying David was perfect, because he knows we have 1st, 2nd Samuel, which is very clear that David's not perfect. Okay,
Indeed.
carry on.
Okay, so verse 5. And as soon as the royal power was firmly in his hand, he struck down his servants who had struck down the king, his father. Does that make you think of anything from earlier in the book of Kings?
Yes.
So
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm not going to remember. There's too many names off the top of the dome. I can't
So
remember.
obviously, I was just thinking about 2 Kings 12, 19 through 21, which records this conspiracy of the servants against Joash.
Yeah.
But you have something else in mind.
Well, I mean, I think this can be seen to reach all the way back to Solomon, who as soon as Solomon is installed and established, David is given in these instructions about how to do vengeance upon these sort of outstanding guilty people. And so I think there's a kind of Solomonic overtone here that he's doing what's good. He's executing justice where it needs to be done. Continue verse 6.
Yep.
But he did not put to death the children of the murderers according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses. And I just want to read this Hebrew, Kakatuv B'Sefer Torat Moshe. So according to what is written in the scroll, we might say, of the Torah of Moses. And, I was talking about this just a second ago. I just want to add here that a lot of sort of mainstream left of center biblical scholars, people that teach at major universities, prestigious places, they will hold to the idea that the law of Moses actually, when the book of Kings says it was found by Josiah, actually it was really sort of codified, invented, formalized at that point.
Huh.
And that would require the idea that statements like this are just propaganda. They're added in, after we've invented this ancient figure Moses, we've come up with this body of law that we've attributed to him, and now we've gone back and rewritten the history because we're the victors. And I think that is a very skeptical, very cynical way to read the Bible. And it's much simpler, much more straightforward to see here that this guy, this king, he's acting in accordance with the Torah that was actually written by Moses. And the Bible is attributing that Torah to Moses. So these people that are claiming that Moses didn't write the Pentateuch, they're claiming to go behind the text and tell us what really happened, not taking the surface level plain statements of the text at face value and reading them.
And I assume they would say the same thing about, like, oh, I don't know, a dude getting thrown on bones and getting resurrected.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
well,
that's a legendary story. Of course, that
like,
never happened.
yeah.
Those things don't happen. Yeah. I think it's also worth commenting here, according to what is written in the book of the Torah, or the scroll of the Torah of Moses, where Yahweh commanded. Mm-hmm. There's a very sophisticated understanding of Scripture here that the human author Moses wrote it, but Yahweh is the one who commanded this.
That's good.
And then, of course, the law that's being appealed to is the idea that if Sam commits a crime, he's the one to be punished, not his children. And so that's what this
Deuteronomy 24,
Yeah.
16.
Yeah, thank you. Very good. Excellent.
You can thank the note in my Bible.
Yeah, and so and now it's quoted here in verse 6. Fathers shall not be put to death because of their children, nor shall children be put to death because of their fathers, but each one shall die for his own sin.
Okay, read the next verse too, because that gives us one more little biographical note.
Verse 7, he struck down
About Amaziah.
10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt and took Selah by storm, the ESV renders it, and called it Joktheel, which is its name to this day.
Okay, that verses like verse 7 are incredibly foreign because they're full of proper nouns that, maybe we remember Edomites, Esau. Okay, I know who they are. None of the rest really stick out. Any editorializing comments or reflective comments on verse 7? How does it prepare us for what's to come?
Well, I think what it's showing is that Amaziah is having these military victories, which is increasing his confidence and his ability, which is ultimately going to be his downfall in the next story. Yeah. I think as well that you've got some matching structures here, which we often point out. In verses 1 through 6, you have the introduction of Amaziah, And then I think you're going to have the end of Amaziah in 17 through 22. Then in verse 7, you have the first record of a great deed of Amaziah. And then you're going to have in verse 15 and following the acts of Joash and what he did, which means the section that we're about to read, verses 8 through 14, are really the center section of the story. And this is where the author zooms in the camera and clearly wants to draw our attention, because what we're going to see is really a surprising providential outworking of history. Here you've had Joash and Amaziah, both who do what's right in the eyes of the Lord, and you would expect, well, the Lord's going to bless them and they're going to have military victories. And in fact, that's not what happens. And so it is a surprising turn that the story is about to take.
So, Sam, why don't you take the lead on the next section, 8 to 14? Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to chime in here.
Okay.
So Psalm 60, the superscription reads like this: to the choir master, according to Shushan Eduth, a miktam of David, so the psalm is attributed to David, for instruction, when he strove with Aram Naharaim, and when Joab, on his return, struck down 12,000 of Edom in the Valley of Salt. And it's that last phrase of the superscription of Psalm 60 that is really close to 2 Kings 14:7. And, David comes before Solomon.
Different historical event.
Yes. So back in the time of David, his commander Joab, so this, 1000 BC or so, we're now probably at around 800 BC. Yeah. And then the author of Kings, of course, he knows about the fall of Jerusalem and the aftermath of those things. So probably mid 500s BC, the author of Kings, I think, is no doubt aware of the superscription of Psalm 60. And so I think that by referencing, this king here in 2 Kings 14:7, striking down 10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt, he wants his audience to think of that psalm, and this is another kind of he's doing what's right in the eyes of Yahweh. He's kind of like David, but not. We're about to see
again, which that might seem obscure to us, but the Psalms would have been like,
oh yeah, they sang them all the time.
Like they would have been like, oh yeah, like Psalm 60.
Yeah, I recognize that.
I recognize that, even if they couldn't say. I probably didn't even have a number, but like even if they were like, oh, I know that. I remember when that happened. Okay, Sam, 8 to 14.
Then Amaziah sent messengers to Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, king of Israel. So southern kingdom writing to the northern kingdom, saying, "Come, let us look one another in the face." Now, I think from reading the rest of the context here as it goes on, this might be a provocation. Come, let us meet face to face in battle. It might be from the way that Jehoash responds that it's not quite as, it's not so much of a provocation. Maybe he's wanting something a little more conciliatory, but nevertheless, clearly the idea here is, let us look one another in the face. We're going to stand before each other as equals, is the idea. And Jehoash is going to have none of that. And Jehoash, king of Israel, sent word to Amaziah, king of Judah, a thistle on Lebanon sent to a cedar on Lebanon, saying, "Give your daughter to my son for a wife." So the thistle is obviously Amaziah, the king of Judah, and Jehoash is calling himself a cedar, obviously.
Yeah, basically like a twig walks up to a massive tree and is like, "Yo,
and we talked
do
about
what
this.
I want." He's like, "No."
We talked about this a couple of episodes ago. All through the Bible, men are trees. They are described with tree-like imagery, and so Jehoash is describing himself as the great cedar. Amaziah is a thistle, and this is not the depiction of Psalm 1, where the king of Israel, the seed of David, is a tree planted by streams of water yielding fruit in its season. Go ahead.
Yeah. I would just note also here, probably the logic of the way that Jehoash is responding goes like this. I'm now going to challenge you in battle. And then the sort of king that's been challenged, the way that he might say, let's have peace, would be to say, well, let's have our kids marry each other. And then they sort of work out a trade deal or something where the guy with the power is essentially saying to the guy that doesn't have power, you're not in a good bargaining position here. I mean, that kind of, those dynamics are at work here.
You're saying the daughter,
the reference to the daughter
is primarily a piece.
Yeah, they very well could have worked out an arranged marriage in order to secure a lasting kind of peace deal between the two nations.
Of course, this is a parable, so it wasn't actually.
Well, I mean, it's almost like they're.
He's recreating a fictional thing to kind of set him up.
Yeah, sure, but I think he's speaking in terms that they would have understood.
Yeah. All right, Sammy.
Give your daughter to my son for a wife, and a wild beast of Lebanon passed by and trampled down the thistle. You have indeed struck down Edom, and your heart has lifted you up. Be content with your glory and stay at home, for why should you provoke trouble so that you fall, you and Judah with you?
So in other words, warns them pretty bad.
Yeah, don't come knocking.
Don't mess with me.
Because, I mean, we're the wild animal that's just going to come and destroy you, trample you down. But Amaziah would not listen. So Jehoash, king of Israel, went up, and he and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another. So, Amaziah gets what he wants. Come, let us look one another in the face. And here they face one another in battle at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. And Judah was defeated by Israel, and every man fled to his home. And Jehoash, king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Jehoash, son of Ahaziah, at Beth Shemesh. Now look at this. And came to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem for 400 cubits, from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate.
I'm looking at it. What am I supposed to see?
Well, let's look at verse 14 as well. And he seized all the gold and silver and all the vessels that were found in the house of Yahweh and in the treasuries of the king's house, also hostages. And he returned to Samaria. So this
Israel ransacks Israel.
That's right. So this reminds us of something that's happened before, and it's also foreshadowing something that is to come. So Jim has pointed out that there are associations here with Solomon, and we're about to see a new king arise in Israel by the name of Jeroboam, which you remember is the first king after the division of the two kingdoms. And so a lot of the imagery here is reminding us of kind of the first generation of that separation, that split that happens in the kingdom of Israel. And if you remember, I believe it's in the reign of Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, defeats Jerusalem and plunders the temple. And one thing that Dale Ralph Davis points out in his commentary is that there are 7 times in the books of Kings in which the temple is plundered. The first being Shishak. This is the 4th occurrence of it. And then the final occurrence of it is going to be Nebuchadnezzar. And the description that we have here of what Joash does to the temple and to the people is very much like what Nebuchadnezzar is going to do, right? He seizes the gold and the silver. He takes Amaziah, king of Judah. He takes hostages. This is essentially an exile. But the one perpetrating the exile is in a foreign nation. It's actually the northern kingdom. It's Israel itself. So this shows just how far things have devolved, the sad spiritual state in Israel at this point. The northern kingdom, King Joash, is playing the role of Nebuchadnezzar, the role of the nations, plundering the temple. And Judah, has been reduced to nothing, to where Amaziah is carted off and they have hostages, that are taken into the northern kingdom. And then if you notice in verse 17, Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived 15 years. I believe ordinarily it says he reigns, in these death notices that were given. But here it just says he lived for 15 years.
Yeah, so which I think effectively, you skipped over 15.
I know we've not got there. I was just pointing out Amaziah's sad
which is
end.
that communicates to us probably like Israel was the effective ruler over Judah.
I think they essentially
ways.
become a vassal state of Israel at this point. And then even as we're going to see with Jeroboam here in a minute, Jeroboam, though not a godly king, is a very effective and powerful king and extends the borders of Israel into the territory of Judah. So I think Judah is in some ways becoming a bit of a vassal state of Israel at this point.
Okay. Very good, Jim.
Civil war in Israel, like Sam said, and Sam is right to point out the pattern of these wicked kings attacking Jerusalem, plundering the temple, and killing and carrying off hostage God's people, and in this case, it's an Israelite doing this. So this is really bad.
You said 7 times in the book of Kings?
In 1st, 2nd Kings, yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar isn't in Kings. Is he?
At the end, 2 Kings 25.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you know I don't like spoilers. I'm thinking like Nebuchadnezzar. But you're right. He shows up right here. Let's read 15 and 16, which is curious for one main reason. What?
Reminds me of that Nate Bargatze bit where he's talking about how he doesn't know history, and so he loves watching historical movies.
Yeah.
So he said, I was watching Pearl Harbor just on the edge of my seat. How's this going to end?
He's the best. Nate, if you're listening, you're invited on Bible Talk anytime. All right.
Are you saying this is interesting because it repeats 13,
Yes.
12, and 13?
It's like it's literally copy and paste with maybe one change.
Why do you think that's there? Why do you think they do that?
I don't know. I mean, I think as a one way, it's a hinge to get to Amaziah because that's where he's going to focus on in 17. I mean, I'm sure there's a more...
Well, anytime we see things like this, I think we should assume it's on purpose.
Of course.
It's intentional, and the author is creating a kind of literary bracket around this material.
Yeah.
So I think that...
we'll read 15 and 16.
Okay, so this is 2 Kings
tell us where
14,
it first shows up.
15 and 16. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoash that he did, and his might, and how he fought with Amaziah, king of Judah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And Jehoash slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel, and Jeroboam his son reigned in his place.
Which is, again,
if we go back
almost a copy and paste from 13, 12, and 13.
That's right. Do you want me to read that or no?
No, it's fine. Okay. I mean, it's only a few words are slightly different. So so the question is, why does it show up again?
Yeah, so I think it's intended to catch our attention and to make us think, okay, what came before that previous statement? What came after that previous statement? And I think we should ask, is there an inclusio that runs from the first one to the second one? And so am I supposed to think about the intervening material kind of in relationship to itself? So these are the kinds of questions I think we should ask. And what's fascinating is that after the first instance in chapter 13, you have that account of the death of Elisha, and then that resurrection account at the end of that. And there's nothing like that follows this second statement.
There's a prophet does show up, though.
Yeah.
For just a sec. Yep. All right.
Can I just make one comment about this, the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel?
Yeah.
So, we've hit a number of references to that document. And I just want to observe that the genealogies in the biblical book of Chronicles, they take us down to the time of like Ezra and Nehemiah at least. Depending on how you interpret the names, they might even take them beyond that generation into like the 300s BC. And if the author of Kings is referring to that document, then the author of Kings is after Chronicles, which doesn't seem likely.
Yeah.
So it seems like the author of Kings is referring to a book that's already in existence. And I don't think we can necessarily say that about the biblical book of Chronicles.
Could it be possible that Chronicles was somewhat of a living, like a changing document?
It could be
like
possible.
Where it was passed down and
it could be possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's possible.
So that's not outside the bounds.
Or it could be something like, Holinshed's Chronicles of England that Shakespeare uses when he writes his book. There's this historical document that other later authors draw from. Yep. So maybe the author of Chronicles is drawing from.
Okay.
When we get to Chronicles, one of the things we're going to see about it is the author, whoever he is, writes it as an intentional capstone of the entire Old Testament storyline.
Yeah.
He is intending to write the conclusion by summarizing basically from Adam all the way through the return of the exile.
Yeah.
Can I make just one more comment on this, Alex? Sorry. You're being very patient and tolerant of my intrusions here today. Yeah.
Jamie's being the most patient.
This opening phrase of verse 16.
Hopefully you get paid by the hour. Hopefully this goes long.
Now the rest of the acts of, and then the king's name, if you sort of track the use of that phrase through the book of Kings, you'll see that like the 14:1 in the second year of, and then the name of the king, this phrase, now the rest of the acts of, and then a lot of the kinds of things that are going to be stated here in 15 and 16, we're going to get a number of appearances of this formula. And it's going to be interesting as we get later in the book, how certain aspects are going to be dropped out. So like verse 16, Jehoash slept with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. Those kinds of statements, as you get later into 2 Kings, we no longer get that he slept with his fathers. We no longer get that he was even buried. And I think it's the author's way of showing how the kings are progressively deteriorating.
Okay, let's read this little synopsis of Amaziah's reign, and then we'll close with Jeroboam II. So we've already, Sam, because you've basically already told us what happens here. You just read it. It's fine.
I spoiled it for you.
That's okay. You also spoiled Nebuchadnezzar. Yeah. Who knew? I was like, he's in Daniel. What are we talking about? And I was like, oh yeah.
Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived 15 years after the death of Jehoash, son of Jehoaz, king of Israel.
You noted that lived does not say reigned, which might imply that even though he lived after Jehoash, he was not sort of actually in power.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah. Now, the rest of the deeds of Amaziah, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem. So this is, again, just like his father Joash in 12:19 through 21. Remember the servants, 19:20, his servants arose and made a conspiracy and struck down Joash in the house of the Millo on the way that goes down to Silla. So here again, in verse 19, and they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish, and they sent after him to Lachish and put him to death there. And they brought him on horses, and he was buried in Jerusalem with his fathers in the city of David. And all the people of Judah took Azariah, who was 16 years old, and made him king instead of his father Amaziah. So even though there's this conspiracy to dethrone Amaziah, it's still the Davidic line that continues on the throne. He built Elath and restored it to Judah after the king slept with his fathers.
Yeah, so he obviously his Q rating, his among the people was not very high.
Q rating?
I don't know. That's something I learned in college like 15 years ago. Like what people think of you.
Do you know what that means, Sam?
I've never heard that.
I'll look it up right now. Q rating. Is it still a thing? I don't even have Wi-Fi, so who knows? Oh, I do. Q rating, also known as Q score, is a measurement of how well known and popular something is.
Nice.
The more you know.
There we go.
So it was low, and so his countrymen
Yeah.
were like, yeah, we want you gone. We want your son in power.
You got a very bad approval rating.
So, yeah, very bad. That would have probably been the more well-known phrase, but Q rating is what I went with. So let's close the chapter here, 2 Kings 14. We're going to shift. The camera's going to shift to Israel now and focus in on Jeroboam II. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to have some interesting correspondences with him and a previous king. So who wants to take the lead as we close?
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, verse 23. In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah.
So it's a little bit of a flashback because he told us he died, and now they're rewinding the tape and saying, when he died, here's what happened in Israel.
That's right. Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. I would just observe that particular expression, do what was evil in the sight of Yahweh, I think it occurs like 60 times in the book of Kings. And back in Deuteronomy 4, starting in verse 25, Moses, I don't know if this is the first instance, but it's a prominent instance where Moses says, essentially, if you go into the land and you do what is evil in the eyes of Yahweh, in the sight of Yahweh. So
where does that show up? Deuteronomy what?
Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 25, I believe is where it is.
Okay, that's fine.
There it is. If you act corruptly by making a carved image in the form of anything and by doing what is evil in the sight of Yahweh your God, so as to provoke him to anger. Deuteronomy 4:25. So this is what Jeroboam did. And then in the middle of verse 24, he did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he made Israel to sin. So back in 1 Kings 13, the making of the 2 golden calves. He restored the border of Israel from Lebo Hamath as far as the sea of the Arabah, according to the word of Yahweh, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai, the prophet, who was from Gath-Hepher.
Okay, there's a lot there. That sounds positive.
Well, it's positive that there's a prophet who's speaking the word of Yahweh.
Oh, I was saying the restoration of the land sounds profitable.
Yeah,
Well,
sure.
maybe from their perspective it sounds positive, but you're noting rightly that this is Jonah of Jonah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's one of the, so which tells us that Elijah and Elisha, and so we probably shouldn't think of prophets maybe as like presidents, right? There's only one, and they kind of pass the baton, right? Would there have been multiple prophets?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. They overlapped. Like
Yeah.
Micah and Isaiah and Hosea are all active in the same
But one
time.
could be
Right,
forgiven
and
for
Haggai.
thinking, it went from Elijah to
Yeah,
Elisha,
sure.
and now it must be Jonah. You know, it's not that way.
Right.
Okay. And so this guy Jeroboam, not related to Jeroboam the first,
Correct.
but named
But
after
the same
him.
name.
Yes.
Which is a bit strange because Jeroboam, not the best king.
Well, if you're if you're a worldly person,
True.
and you think about things not in biblical terms but in worldly terms, hey, this guy reigned over 11 of the 12 tribes, 10 of the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
And he established a kingdom that dominates that southern kingdom.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking in worldly terms, I'm going to name my kid Jeroboam.
Fair. Yeah. Good point.
Verse 26 quotes Deuteronomy 32:36. And it says, "For Yahweh saw that the affliction of Israel was very bitter, for there was none left bond or free, and there was none to help Israel. But Yahweh had not said that
Okay,
he would."
hang on, back up.
Okay.
That's a quote, even though there is no quotation, nor is there a "as Moses once wrote."
Let me read the rest of verse
right,
27.
fine.
Okay. But Yahweh had not said that he would blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, so he saved them by the hand of Jeroboam the son of Joash. So this guy's wicked, and in spite of his wickedness, the Lord is saving the northern kingdom through him.
So when it says "for there was none left, bond
Yeah.
or free,
So-
and there was none
so-
to help Israel,"
so-
what is he?
In Deuteronomy 32, there's sort of this rehearsal of the history of Israel.
Yeah.
And when we get to verse 26 of Deuteronomy 32, the Lord says, "I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will wipe them from human memory." And we just read in verse 27 of 2 Kings 14, Yahweh had not said that he would blot out the name of Israel. Okay, so in other words, the author is saying, the Lord didn't say he was going to blot them out. And that's exactly what Deuteronomy 32:26 speaks of. And then he goes on and explains why he's not going to blot them out. And then down in verse 36, it says,
Or back in Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy 32:36, "For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants." So it's kind of like he's going to discipline them. They're going to experience persecution, affliction, deportation, exile, all the rest. But then the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining, bond or free. In other words, when they've all been taken captive and they're almost totally dead as a nation. I think that's the idea. And then at that point, the Lord's going to vindicate them. And then verse 39 of Deuteronomy 32 says, the Lord says, "See now that I, even I am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal." So it's like he's saying, I'm going to discipline Israel and basically kill them and then raise them from the dead.
So
And what's going on here, I think the author of Kings is saying, is an installment in the pattern that will be that will culminate and be fulfilled in the pattern of exile and return from exile.
okay,
So that the salvation under Jeroboam anticipates the future salvation.
I'm only confused on one point.
Okay.
Deuteronomy 32 is written to sort of unified Israel.
Yes.
This is talking about
The northern kingdom.
the northern kingdom.
Yeah.
I thought the promise.
Well, even in Deuteronomy.
So hold on. What we're saying is 32. It's fitting to say that stuff like that does apply to all Israel, not only
Yeah.
Judah.
I mean,
Whereas
even Jeremiah
2
31.
Samuel 7
Yeah.
applies specifically because it's about kingship,
Yeah.
David
and
his seed.
not sort of restoration or enduring,
Yeah.
to all Israel.
Yeah.
Right. Is that a fair distinction?
Even the new covenant promise in Jeremiah 31 is promising a new covenant for Israel and Judah. So, and I think really it's an appeal to the seed of Abraham, the offspring of Abraham. They're going to be redeemed. And I think stuff like this plays into Paul's logic in Romans 11.
Yeah. Well,
The gifts and calling of God are irrevocable. God has said he's going to save these people. He's going to save them. Now, I want to make a comment about what we see here and the use of a word like typology to describe this.
Yeah. Well, and one last reflection. It also helps us to not localize the promises to Israel only in Jesus's kingship.
Yeah, that's right.
There are other attenuating things. Now, people are going to disagree on that.
Yeah.
But there's other things to say about what the Lord promises Israel, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that
That's right.
Sam, what do you think?
I don't know what you mean by that.
Well, I don't. Well, I just mean this is obviously not fulfilled in Jesus becoming the Messiah.
Well,
This promise that that he's referring to here.
Well, I would say ultimately it is.
yeah. So ultimately, the role that, I mean, it's ironic here because Jeroboam is wicked.
As Jim is saying that the hope of resurrection comes through the pattern of exile and restoration, death and resurrection.
Yeah.
I'm mainly thinking about the fact that he says, "I'm not going to blot Israel out,
Yeah.
ever."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which has
I think that resonates
which does that have anything to do with the fact that here we are in 2025,
Yeah.
and there's still Israel,
Yeah, I mean, I think
or is that are those two things just disparate facts?
Yeah.
Or are they connected?
The answer to the
am I-
issues that
I'm
you're
not-
raising,
I'm
it
confused a
really
little
turns
bit.
on how you interpret Romans 11,
yeah.
which Lord willing we'll get to one day, and Sam and I'll have a big throwdown.
And I'll just be sitting here like, how are we still here?
So recently on a podcast,
So do you understand what the point I was? I maybe was not clear.
No, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
recently on a podcast, friends, people that I would consider friends, one of them said, typology was not a reading strategy in the New Testament. Typology is not the way the New Testament authors read the Bible. And I think what he means is, well, what I'll grant of what he means is that, yeah, they're not saying, I'm doing typology, right? They're not
Just like he didn't say, and now I'm quoting Moses.
Exactly. So they're not calling what they're doing every time they do it typology. However, what we have here is the words of Moses in Deuteronomy 32 create a certain expectation for a certain pattern of events. And this is what I'm talking about when the subtitle of my book uses the phrase promise-shaped patterns. So Moses' words in Deuteronomy 32 shape the expectations, shape the framework within which a later author, like the author of Kings, maybe Jeremiah or someone else, interprets what he sees. And then when he records what he sees, he records a certain pattern of events and even quotes the words of Moses to interpret that pattern of events. Now, Jeremiah or whoever wrote Kings is not saying, hey, look at me, I'm doing typology here. But I would argue that's what typology is.
Well, it's odd because it's both subtle,
Yeah.
in that it doesn't say as the beloved Moses once wrote,
Yeah.
but also explicit.
Right.
It's like this
Well,
weird.
I mean,
because
you
if
do
you
have
don't
there in
know
verse-
if you don't know Deuteronomy,
Right.
you're not going to pick up on those verses because because you'd be forgiven for not, because a moment earlier he says, as the Lord wrote through Moses,
Right.
and here he doesn't, and yet he's doing the same thing.
Well, this goes back to what we
This is
were
why
talking
we should know
about.
our Bibles.
This goes back to what we were talking about earlier, embracing the interpretive perspective of the biblical authors. What is it that informed their moral imagination? What is it that informed their vocabulary, their patterns of speech, the way that they told stories? Well, it wasn't Marvel Comics and the Harry Potter movies.
I'm right here still.
And all of this, what is it that shaped them and the way that they spoke? Well, it was the Old Testament scriptures that had already been written up to that time.
I try to do both and
so,
You do a great job, Alex.
just as
There
are certain
Alex,
things.
I love the quotations that run through your forthcoming book.
yeah.
That's
Thank
an
you.
awesome set of quotations.
yeah, they're a mixed bag.
Yeah, they are. They run from high to low. It's awesome.
So there are certain things that just they're implanted in us, such that if we just hear a couple of words of something, we immediately know where it comes from. If I just say the words "fourscore," people immediately think of the Gettysburg Address. It's part of us, and that's how the biblical authors work. They're not going to spell out every single detail of where they're drawing these types of phrases from, but they anticipate that you as a reader are going to operate with the same set of assumptions that they're operating with, and from which they are writing.
In the same way
Go ahead.
that somebody that listens to every episode of a certain podcast will immediately recognize the two figures that I'm referring to. You know, if you've heard the podcast that I'm talking about,
Which figures?
well, it's Room for Nuance.
Oh.
And it's our friend Sean DeMars
okay.
and Patrick Schreiner. And and Patrick is saying, you know, they weren't doing typology. And
Patrick drove me to school in 7th grade.
Did he really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, you know, if somebody listening to that podcast, the minute I start talking about it, they're like, oh, I heard that episode. I know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like it's a shared vocabulary, a shared
That's right.
reference.
Cultural encyclopedia that we share.
Okay, guys, we got
to finish.
We got to finish. I have a phone call in 11 minutes. That will not be as fun as this, but I'm totally lost.
All we have left are verses 28 and 29.
I'm here arguing for like restoration of Israel. 2
Kings 14:28. Now the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, there's that formula again, and all that he did and his might, how he fought and how he restored Damascus and Hamath.
Did we do all the others before? Yeah, we did. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
To Judah in Israel, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? And Jeroboam slept with his fathers, the kings of Israel, and Zechariah his son reigned in his place.
Any concluding comments?
I'm happy.
What an awesome narrative.
Yeah. What a good time. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We're glad to be here. Jamie, you're doing a great job. Thank you for listening and watching. And always remember Psalm 111, verse 2, great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them.
Amen.
For more articles, books, and podcasts, please visit 9marks.org.